Does Jesus matter? As a born-again evangelical atheist, I will answer that question with 10 lessons I learned from one passage in the Bible. See, in my early 20s, I became a born-again evangelical atheist. I had a religious conversion that led me to a belief that there was no God. It was a very liberating experience to be free from this hell-punishing monster I had understood God to be. It was so liberating, in fact, that I became evangelical in my beliefs. I tried to convince other people of the good news that God did not exist. This being that we all needed to fear did not exist. And it seemed like that should actually be a pretty easy task to convince people that God did not exist because it was so improvable anyway. And the only defense I ever got against me, people gave me, was, well, the Bible says, which, frankly, thinking people know is what they call a circular argument. You don't prove the existence of airplanes, by the way, using a marketing pamphlet from Boeing. Okay? However, I did begin to wonder, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong in my beliefs? You ever wonder that? Because all the proof, frankly, that I had that God did not exist simply comes from a different marketing pamphlet, to be honest. Proofs such as, well, Rick, no one's ever seen God. That's proof that God doesn't exist? I don't think so. It's only proof that nobody's seen God. Proof saying that there's no way God would allow such suffering, so that means God must not exist. Now, those are both interesting points, but they're not proof. So I committed myself to spending 5 years studying the enemy's playbook, the Bible. And eventually I even got a master's and doctoral degrees in Bible. And it's produced some interesting outcomes I'm going to share with you in this video. Many of which, by the way, church people and maybe even atheists both would object to. So, when faced with the question, does Jesus matter? You have to first ask yourself, which Jesus are we referring to here? And this is no easy task. I mean, there's 45,000 different Christian denominations that will try to define Jesus according to their liking, the things they want to see happen, all using the same book that, frankly, most of them have probably never even read. So the main question I had to face is, who do I say Jesus is? Not who do they say he is, who do I say he is? And ironically, there's a pivotal verse in Matthew that maps all this out for us, this very interaction, if we all collectively care to see it. It's in Matthew 16. And it's when Jesus comes into a place called Caesarea Philippi with his disciples. And as they're coming into Caesarea Philippi, he asks them, he says, who do people say I am? Here's what's key. He waits to ask this question until they get to Caesarea Philippi, this exact point. He asks this question in the shadow of human power and greatness. That's what Caesarea Philippi represented to his disciples and people at that. So you see that town, Caesarea Philippi? It was emblematic of all that represents power in the world. It was a town built in honor of Caesar, the most powerful man to ever exist. It was a center of all that was great in the world, you know. It was in this shadow, it was in this environment, in this shadow of worldly greatness that Jesus, a man of no obvious consequential value at all, a peasant, asked the question, in the midst of all of this, who do people say I am? It's a good question. And here's lesson number one. Jesus is a challenge to human power structures. You don't hear that a lot. Jesus is a challenge to human power structures. He confronts them, and he never consoles them, human power structures. It's an important lesson. People probably won't tell you that. Matthew 16 goes on. So when they're coming to Caesarea Philippi, he asks, who do people say I am? And his disciples respond, well, some say you're John the Baptist, and others say you're Elijah, and still others say you're Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. Lesson number two is this. Never take someone else's opinion of somebody. because it's usually wrong, right? Check it out for yourself. The way the disciples responded here has continued to this day. Well, some say this, some say that. And it turns out even the very version of Jesus I personally received from the church was largely inaccurate. Notably, for example, I had heard that Jesus was my ticket out of hell and into heaven. That was the main function of Jesus. Get out of hell, get to heaven. That's why Jesus existed. I learned that I had to accept Jesus in my heart and ask for forgiveness for my sins. I also learned that Jesus was the only mechanism for getting this someplace good when I was dead. It's the only way I could do it. I was told that what he did was really all about me. It was all for me. And that religion was all about me and getting something good for me when I was dead. And it was done because, A, they believed this, but also in an attempt to convince me to join them because of how much is in it for me, I was told. I had been instructed also that without an ability to believe certain facts about Jesus, including, say, the virgin birth, for example, from a divine impregnation, that I was going to be destined for that horrible place called hell after death. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. Jesus never said those things. In fact, there are numerous examples in the Bible that contradict those very claims, yet those claims persist today. So back in Matthew 16, Jesus spins around and looks them individually and personally in the eyes. It becomes personal at that point. He says, okay, so that's who they say I am, but what about you? He said, what about you individually? Who do you say I am? This is where I live every day of my personal life, in the greatness and the seduction of all that is worldly, powerful, and great. And I have to ask myself that daily question, but who do I say he is? If nothing else, when asking the question, does Jesus matter? It matters that I ask that question. In the shadow of all that is humanly powerful and great. Lesson number 3. What we personally think about Jesus does matter to Jesus. We continue. He says, what about you? Who do you say I am? And Simon Peter answers, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That sounds like something a church person would say, doesn't it? Messiah, of course, literally means the anointed one, which is another churchy word, which means you've been given a special blessing from God to carry out God's purposes on earth. Peter saw that Jesus had been chosen, anointed for something, but what that something was exactly remained something of a mystery at this point. At least Peter didn't seem to catch it. It turns out who we say he is very closely linked to what he's going to do, which makes sense, right? So we know what we're hoping Jesus will do. We're hoping he's going to get us someplace good when we're dead. We're hoping that he's going to facilitate our efforts to become great again. He's hoping that he's going to heal our diseases and take care of all of our problems and cure all the suffering in the world. We'd like Jesus to come do some magic, right? And fix all our problems. Now, if Jesus was unwilling to do that, well, then we insist he must not be real. And frankly, my kids could say the same thing about me. When they were growing up, I refused to fix all the stuff they wanted me to fix in their lives. However, that did not cease to mean that I was not real, even though it did make them very, very angry. Okay? The problem with all this, well, Jesus is the problem. Jesus and his lack of alignment with our goals, objectives, and definitions of greatness, all of that is the problem. All of that's going to cause this sort of constant consternation when we find out the truth of who he really is. Matthew 16 continues. It says, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this wasn't revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter this day, and on this rock I will build my church. Pretty powerful stuff, huh? From that time on, though, here's where it gets tricky in Matthew 16. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to them what that special assignment was. He began to explain to them all that Jesus would have to go through, the suffering, the rejection, the abandonment from all the people that were supposed to accept him from the church of his day. He says he's going to have to go through Jerusalem and suffer many things at their hands. The elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law. And that eventually he's going to be killed. That's what it said. This is not what we want. This is not good news to see this suffering. We don't want that from our heroes. Our heroes don't get rejected and abandoned. They get honored and adored, right? They become great again. What Jesus was describing was not in Peter's plan. It was not who Peter actually thought Jesus was. It's us making Jesus who we want him to be and creating a religion that makes us feel good about ourselves. Lesson number 4. There's a Jesus we all hope to find. And then there's the Jesus who's actually there. Those are usually two different Jesuses. So continuing on in Matthew 16. So Peter took Jesus aside. He says, "Never, Lord, never. This will never happen to you." Lesson number 5. Protecting Jesus from suffering is a bad choice. In fact, protecting Jesus from anything is a bad choice. It's not going to end well. The church seems to think that we need to defend Jesus. But Jesus never asked for anybody to defend him, even though it makes us feel pretty good about ourselves when we go about defending Jesus, defending his honor against all that is bad, all the bad sinners in the world. At this point, we learn this, because then Jesus turns to Peter and he says this, "Get behind me, Satan." Satan. He went from being the church to being Satan in 2 verses. He says, "You're a stumbling block to me. You don't have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. All you care about is human stuff." Remember, we are in the shadow of human greatness. We are in the shadow of Caesarea Philippi. We're in the shadow of human concerns here. And Jesus has pointed this out to say, you have in mind Caesarea Philippi. I have in mind the way, the truth, and the life. Those are 2 different places. 2 different places. And Peter, right now, you're thinking of Caesarea Philippi. You're thinking of human greatness. So, then Jesus turns to his disciples. He turns to his disciples, right? And he says these things. Whoever wants to be my disciple, whoever wants to be my follower, has to deny themselves and take up their own cross and follow me. That's it. Whoever wants to save their life is going to lose their life. Whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world? Caesarea Philippi. What good is it for somebody to become great again, yet forfeit their soul, he wants to know. Or what can somebody give in exchange for their soul? Lesson number 6. Jesus' message were always directed at his disciples, people who were wanting to follow him, not at some group of sinners. The church today keeps trying to tell sinners what to do, but Jesus always talked to his disciples and the church. Lesson number 7. The cross wasn't about Jesus dying for our sins to get you into heaven. The cross was about us denying ourselves and our need for human greatness to sacrifice for others. That's the point of the cross. It's not about what Jesus did for us. It's about what we are to do for others in denying ourselves. We don't like to see that, though. It's ugly. It's tough. It's hard. No one wants to hear that lesson. Lesson number 7. People want to make the cross all about what's in it for us, what's in it for me, while Jesus himself says, if you want to follow me, you have to deny yourself and sacrifice for others. Verse 27, for the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with angels. Sounds kind of powerful. And then he will reward each person. And he's going to reward each person not by what they believe, not by who they've accepted in their heart, not by what rituals and things. He will reward each person according to what they have done. Lesson number 8. What you do matters. In fact, what you do matters more than what you've believed. Nobody's going to tell you that. Because we all just want to believe stuff. We don't want to do anything. Believing stuff is easy. Doing stuff is hard. Sacrificial generosity for others, that's hard. That's doing. Anybody can spew, I believe in Jesus. Very few can say, I'm going to live a sacrificial life for the benefit of others. So, Does Jesus matter? It depends. Does living a life of sacrificial generosity to those viewed as the least of those in the world, does that matter to you? Lesson number 9. In the end, as an evangelical atheist, after years and decades, really, of extensive and expensive research, I've determined that Jesus is actually the way, the truth, and the life, regardless if I ever believed he was born of a virgin or someone parted the Red Sea or somebody got swallowed by a big fish and lived to tell about it. Lesson number 10. I don't know why suffering is here. I don't. I don't think it pertains to whether or not God exists or not. But what I do know about suffering is that while I'm on the way of Jesus, it is my responsibility to help alleviate the suffering of others, including and maybe even especially those who don't deserve it, the least of these in the world. If you'd like to hear more, please subscribe.